Yeah, this is what I'm doing. I'm creating a snapshot of MX Linux. G'day, welcome back to the channel. So in this episode I'm going to show you the complete process of setting up MX Linux so it runs amazingly, which is a big call considering that MX Linux already runs pretty amazingly already, but I'm going to show you some extra steps you can take to not only secure your system but also to actually organize it in such a way where it's so easy to run and manage and maintain. So let's jump into the computer and get started. Cool, so here I am in a fresh install of MX Linux, and pretty much all I've done is I've downloaded and installed Simple Screen Recorder, and that's to record the session, and I've just done a little bit of a tweak to Firefox, and that's all I've done. So before I begin, I'm actually going to edit the preferences of my terminal, and that's just so that we can see what's going on easier. So I'll just right click in the window here, select preferences, and firstly I'm going to change this where the cursor is, and I'm going to change that to an I-beam, and I'll get it to blink as well. Then I'll go over to the appearance and change it from having a transparent background to having a solid background. And the last thing I'll do is I'll actually increase the font size. So at the moment it's at 11 point, so I'll change that to say 14. There we go, and I can close out of there now, and that just makes the terminal a little bit easier to read. Cool, so I'll exit out of there. And the very first thing to do is, of course, run the updates. So down in the panel there is this green box which indicates that there are updates available, and as you can see 35 new updates are available. Now I should actually mention that I downloaded and installed, I'll just show you now, the latest snapshot of MX Linux. So I'll just jump into the website, and if you go to the download page and scroll down the page, this here is actually the official XFCE release that I have been using, but I've now actually downloaded and installed the official monthly snapshot, which has all the upgrades and subsequent bug fixes since the original. So it sort of saves a little bit of time because it actually has a lot of the updates and upgrades, etc., applied to the ISO image. But if you are still using the official release and you're following along the session, then pretty much everything that I'm going to do you'll still be able to do if you installed using this official XFCE release. Cool, so I'll just exit out of Firefox and go to the updater. So this is the MX updater, and so before I actually run the updates I'll just enable both of these options to automatically answer yes, and also to close the window once the upgrade is completed. Then I'll just press upgrade, throw in the old password, and off we go. So I'll just expand this window as well. And so this update should take about 5 to 10 minutes to complete, so I'll just speed up this little bit of the video and then rejoin you once it has completed. Fantastic, the update is completed, and I'd actually noticed that this was quite an important update because not only was it updating a few of the modules and things like that, it actually updated the kernel as well. So I've gone from a 5.09 kernel to a 5.10 kernel, which means that it'd probably be a good idea to do a reboot. So I'm going to restart my system, and then once it has restarted I'll continue from there. And we're back, so let's continue. So I'm going to jump into my apps menu and load a program called MX Tools. So this is a application that actually comes native with MX Linux. It's absolutely brilliant. and I'll just resize it so we can see all of the items in the MX Tools application. And so there are heaps of things we can do using the MX Tools application. If you ever run into issues, you could use any of these to fix your system. There is also this section here, the live section. So once I've actually finished setting up my computer, I can actually create a snapshot and then turn it into a live USB drive, which means that I can take my setup and install that exact setup onto different computers, which is really, really cool. A massive time saver. And although you could probably use Ventoy to do the same thing, to actually create a live USB drive using your ISO image that you create or the snapshot, having it as part of the MX Linux system is really, really cool. Cool, so I'm going to jump straight into the setup section, and there's a few things that I'm not going to worry about changing, but one thing that I will use is this NVIDIA driver installer. So before I use that, I'll show you what I mean. I'll open up my terminal and just tile that to the left, and then if I run a neofetch, as you can see here, this laptop that I'm using right now actually has 2 GPUs. So there is an Intel 3rd Gen graphics controller as well as an NVIDIA GeForce graphics controller. So at the moment, my system is actually only using the Intel 3rd Gen core processor and not the NVIDIA GeForce, because the driver for the NVIDIA card has not yet been installed. And if I wanted to check that, I'll just clear the window, Control L to clear the window. And then if I run XFCE -G and then space and this is so I can run a second command as well, and then this time type optirun XFCE -G and then press return. And firstly, it's showing that optirun has not been found, so it needs the install of Bumblebee or the NVIDIA driver that is relevant to this computer. But it's showing that for rendering, it's still using the Intel graphics card. So once I've done the install, I'll run the same command again just to confirm that the NVIDIA card has indeed been installed. So I'll exit out of there and then go over to this NVIDIA driver installer, throw in the old password, and then follow this process. Now, you could actually download the driver for your computer. It's pretty easy to find on the NVIDIA website itself, but then you'd probably have to configure it and set it up, etc. By running it using this method, using the MX Tools NVIDIA graphics installer, then it actually does a lot of the configuring for you. So all I'm going to do is follow the defaults. So by pressing enter, it'll actually select whatever is the default, and I don't have to type in the number. So I'll just press enter. And so this is now updating my repositories. Cool, and it's found a candidate, which is the NVIDIA Legacy 390XX driver, which is actually the driver that I need for my system. So because my computer is not running a really new NVIDIA card, then I don't actually need to check the MX test repo for a later version. So I'll press enter for the default, which is no. And now it's asking if this is an NVIDIA Intel Optimus system, which basically means is it a hybrid system, which indeed it is. As you saw earlier, I actually had both the Intel card and an NVIDIA card in the system. So it is a hybrid system. So I'll press yes for the default. And then yes again. And now the install has commenced. Cool, so this should only take about 5 or so minutes to complete. During the process, I'll actually be prompted about having a conflict with the Xorg server, which is handling my graphics, and it'll actually prompt me to restart my system. So when that actually happens, I'll return to that, but I'll just speed up this little bit of the video until then. And there we go, I've been prompted with a message saying that the free Nouveau kernel is currently in conflict with the non-free NVIDIA kernel, which I'm in the process of installing. So as you can see here, the easiest way to fix this is to reboot the machine once the installation has finished. So I'll just press next and then let this complete. before I do a reboot. There we go, I've now installed the NVIDIA card driver, so I'll press enter to exit out of there, and I'll just close MX Tools and then do a reboot or a restart, and then I'll catch you on the other side of the restart. Cool, so I've just done the reboot, so I'm going to now test my graphics card. So I'll open up my terminal and then run that same command that I did earlier, which was XFCE -G and then space and to run the second command, optirun XFCE -G. Let's see how we go now. And there we go. So now I actually have the NVIDIA driver installed, and it shows here that I can use either the Intel card for my rendering or my GeForce NVIDIA card for rendering. So that is absolutely awesome. And if I wanted to really make sure that my GeForce graphics card is indeed running, then what I would do is run the command optirun. And so optirun is the statement that I preface any command where I want to use the NVIDIA card. So I'll just run the glx gears. And there we go. So glx gears here is actually being rendered by my NVIDIA card. And so this is showing that my NVIDIA card is indeed all operational, and it's even showing the frame rates per second are around about 60 frames per second. And that's a pretty decent speed for rendering. So I'll close out of glx gears. And now if I wanted to actually edit the settings of my NVIDIA graphics card, what I do is jump into the apps menu, do a search for NVIDIA, and so NVIDIA X Server settings. If I try to run that at the moment, it's giving me a message here that says, you do not appear to be using the NVIDIA X driver. Please edit your X configuration file. Just run this command, which is NVIDIA-xconfig as root. So that would be prefaced by sudo, and then restart the X server. However, if I were to do that, it would actually create a brand new config file, which is not needed. And then the next time I reboot my system, I actually end up rebooting into my TTY login, where I actually end up at my command prompt, because the X server is running from a separate instruction from what the NVIDIA X server requires. So there's already a config file that has been created, so I don't need to create a new config file. So I'll exit out of here. And I actually encountered this issue myself after I installed the NVIDIA graphics card. And what I did was I jumped online to the MX Linux website. And if you just scroll up here and hover over support and then forum, you'll see there is a MX Linux forum. And I actually posed this question of why the NVIDIA X server was not actually functioning. So I jumped in here, went to the hardware configuration, and as you can see right here, this is me asking that exact same question. And I have to say that the MX team are absolutely awesome. They helped me pretty much straight away, and not only did I get an answer to the question that I was asking, I even got more information that was really, really helpful. So that's the MX Linux forum. I'll go back to my command prompt. And so the command to actually open up this NVIDIA X server using the GeForce graphics card is you actually have to run the command optirun -b or lowercase b and then none, followed by NVIDIA-settings, which is the command that opens the NVIDIA X server settings, then followed by -c and then space :8. So now if I press enter, it'll open up the NVIDIA X server settings. There we go. And this is now actually utilizing the NVIDIA graphics card. So a brilliant solution. And to actually make life a bit easier, what I'm going to do is quit out of there and then copy this whole command, Control-Shift-C, which is the copy command in terminal, and then jump over to my apps menu, do another search for NVIDIA. There it is there. And so I'll just right click that, select Edit Application, and then change this command to the command that I just copied. So Control V to paste, and then save. And I can now exit out of my terminal. And then jump back into my apps menu, NVIDIA, and now every time I launch my NVIDIA X Server settings from here, it'll actually open using the NVIDIA card. So absolutely brilliant, isn't it? Cool. Now, if you wanted to do a quick bit of editing, for example, let's jump into the thermal settings. And at the moment, my computer's graphics card is hovering around about 70, 71 degrees centigrade. Now, if I jump into my OpenGL settings and then move the slider all the way to high quality on the far left, and then jump down into my power miser, and then so at the moment the power miser settings is set to auto, which has picked the mode of adaptive, which is this level here, level 0, and so the maximum the graphics clock will run at is 270 megahertz, and the memory transfer rate, the maximum is 810 megahertz. But if I change this to prefer maximum performance, as you can see it's changed to level 1, which is a higher graphics clock rate and also a higher memory transfer rate, and even the processor clock has almost doubled. So if you wanted to actually find out what each mode is, you just hover over here, and as you can see here, the auto mode lets the driver choose the best performance. The adaptive mode allows the GPU clocks to be adjusted based on your GPU utilization, so how much your GPU is actually being used. And then prefer maximum performance will actually hint to the driver to prefer the higher GPU clocks when possible. So now that I've changed these two settings, if I go back to the thermal settings, as you can see, the temperature is actually going to rise a little bit more. So if your computer actually runs a little bit hot, then the easy solution to drop this temperature here is just to jump back to your power miser and then change it to auto, and then go up to your OpenGL settings and then move the slider all the way to the far right, which is now going to set the NVIDIA card to function at a higher performance. Now if I jump into my thermal settings, as you can see, it's already dropping below 70 degrees. It's even dropping again. So if I just left this setting as is, then it would actually be perfectly fine, and my computer would probably stay a little bit cooler than it would if I was driving my graphics card a little bit harder. So basically the way that a hybrid system works, or a system that's running both an Intel and an NVIDIA or some other card at the same time, is that the graphics that I see on my display will actually be displayed using the Intel card, and my rendering tasks, like if I render video or if I'm changing a format of video using, say, a program like Handbrake to render a video to another format or to compress it or anything like that, then the NVIDIA card will actually handle those tasks. So that's one of the benefits of having a hybrid system. You don't actually have the one graphics card trying to do all of the tasks that you are requiring of the computer. Cool, so I'll just quit out of my NVIDIA server settings. And now to actually run any program utilizing the NVIDIA graphics card, for example, I'll just jump into my apps menu and then install a program just to show you exactly how this works. So this is the MX package installer, which we'll get into a little bit more in the next video. But in this video, I'll just do a quick install of the Flatpak version of Blender. Fantastic, and I'll just do a quick search. There it is there. So I'll just quickly install this. And I'll speed up this little bit of the video and then rejoin you as soon as it's installed. And there we go, the installation has completed. So I'll just OK out of there and close that. And so now to actually run this Flatpak application is you just jump into your apps menu and then do a search for the application that you're going to run. So Blender is the application, and then right click the launcher, go to edit application, and then in the command line all you have to do is amend it by typing optirun at the start. Optirun space, and that's all there is to it. So as I said, this command works with any application that you want to run using the NVIDIA graphics card if you're running a hybrid system. So I'll just save that, and now if I jump back into the apps menu and run Blender, there we go. So this is now the latest version of Blender, hence why I actually installed the Flatpak version and not the stable repo version, which is a slightly older version of Blender, even though it's still good. But this being the latest version of Blender is the Flatpak. And so this is now currently running on my laptop using the NVIDIA graphics card. So I'll just exit out of there and continue. So I'll jump back into my apps menu and load the MX Tools application again. And I'll just move this to the left. Cool, so that was the NVIDIA driver installer. Next, I'm actually going to install the codecs. So this is a really, really awesome function. And basically what I'm doing now is installing the codecs that are required to play pretty much most media or videos that you may ever download or use on your computer. Well, it's actually saying that the internet's not available, which is not true. So I'll press OK again, and there we go, it's running. Now, if you're doing things like rendering videos or watching videos that you've downloaded from online or you've transferred in older formats, then having these codecs installed is actually brilliant because you're quite likely to be able to watch these videos. And I should actually mention that VLC does come pre-installed in MX Linux, and VLC actually has a lot of these codecs pre-built into the program itself. So this is sort of just an extra step in case any of the codecs are missing from VLC, then this should actually cover everything. Cool, so the next thing I'm going to do is edit the Conky. So what the Conky is this item here. So that's the clock, and it's showing my hard drive space that's been used, my RAM that's been used, and how much my CPU has been used. So I'll go over to this Conky item and then press OK. And if I just move this to the left a little bit, and what I'll do is I'll expand the window so we can see all of it. Well, almost all of it. So if you wanted to actually edit this Conky straight away, then you can change the colors. Like for example, my CPU percentile is pretty hard to see on the background that I'm using currently. So I could easily just change that, say, to white. And there we go. It's slightly easier to see, but maybe not. Maybe I'll try black. There we go. It's a little bit easier to see, but I'm actually going to change this Conky completely. So what I'll do is I'll jump into my Conky manager, and this Conky manager can also be accessed if you jump into your apps menu and search for Conky, and this is the launcher for this Conky manager right here. Cool, so I'll just expand this window a little bit more as well. And so this is the Conky that's currently running, which is the pink Roboto. So I'm going to deselect that, and let's see, I'll run this Core Blue Conky RC2 Core. So I'll just load that. And there we go, so I've changed the Conky. Now, currently, as you can see, it's a little bit difficult to see with the background image that I have running. So if I go up here to these cogs here to edit the widget, I can easily just change the transparency from transparent to semi-transparent, and I'll just boost up the opacity to say 50. And there we go. So it's given a little bit of a semi-transparent background. So that makes it just slightly easier to see on the current desktop that I've got. And I can even move it around a bit. So if I jump over to the location tab and change the horizontal and the vertical gap to say 40. and then press apply, that'll move it slightly away from the edge and slightly down from the top. So if, for example, you wanted to run your panel at the top of your screen, then you can easily just move this down by changing the vertical gap. So I'll just change it to say 60. And that's moved it down slightly. Cool, but I'll actually move that back up to say 40, and I'll change the horizontal gap down to 20. And there we go. So that's pretty much how to edit the Conky. So if I just close out of here now, and then close out of the Conky manager, and then back in MX Conky. Now currently this Conky is only showing on workspace 1. So for example, if I jump over to workspace 2, the Conky isn't showing. So I'll jump back to workspace 1, and then all you have to do is change this desktop preference to all desktops. There we go, and then close out of there, and then no to that, and then jump into my second workspace. And as you can see, the Conky is now on both workspaces. So if you have, say, more workspaces than 2, then the Conky will actually show up on every workspace. Cool, so that's the Conky. Let's move on. So the next thing I'm going to do is move to this tweak item, and this is going to actually tweak the panel. So this is the panel here, and this is absolutely brilliant. So in XFCE, normally how you move a panel is you right click it, hover over panel, and then choose panel preferences. And say I wanted to move this to the bottom, then I'd have to unlock it, change the mode to horizontal, and then grab the handle and move it down to the bottom, and then I can lock it again. And as you can see, by doing it that way, it's kept all of the items on the panel in the same order, which means that the apps menu is now on the far right, even though I prefer to have it on the far left. And the logout or shutdown button is on the far left, which I prefer it on the far right. And even the clock is on the left as well, and I do prefer it down here. Now, I could move it by right-clicking the panel and going to panel preferences, and then items, and then say moving the whisker menu using the arrow, and then move it all the way across, and then get the logout button and move it all the way across. But that takes a bit of time. There's actually a much simpler way of doing this. So I'll just close out of there, and in MX Tweak I'm going to select Restore Default Panel and click Apply, and this should actually bring it back to where it was initially. Fantastic. And so by using this function here, display the panel horizontally at the bottom, if I press apply now, it's going to move this panel to the bottom of my screen, but it's also going to shuffle some of the items around. So for example, now the apps menu is still on the left hand side, the logout button is on the right hand side, and the clock even has been moved to the right of the system tray. So it is a bit of a time saver by using the MX Tweak application. Cool, so I'll just move this to the left a bit, and that's all I'll do here. So in the next video I'll actually do a lot more theming, and I'll show you how I actually theme my desktop to my preferences, so it's highly functional and actually quite beautiful. And I'll also do a whole bunch of installs of applications that are really good for business or study, but that's in the next video. So in this video I'm just sort of doing really basic theming. So that said, I'll now jump over to the theme tab. And so you probably noticed when I want to actually resize my windows, trying to find this corner down here can actually be quite difficult. So I'm still trying to find the corner. I'm using a trackpad, so that doesn't make life any easier. Oh, I found it. So I can now resize this window now that I've found the corner. Now the thing is, as it is, I'm trying to find a 1 pixel by 1 pixel space, so trying to find that corner can actually be quite cumbersome and a little bit annoying too. But up here in the themes, there are 2 themes, a dark and a light, that have thick borders. So if I apply that, now when I go to resize, it's actually really easy to find not only the corners but also the edges. So the MX light thick borders or the MX dark thick borders. I'm actually going to choose the dark thick borders actually, because I do prefer to run my system using a dark theme, and there is a little bit of theory behind the benefits of using dark themes over light themes. One of the reasons is that it does save slightly on your battery power, and the other reason why I do prefer using a dark theme is it's actually slightly easier on your eye. Now, the theory behind it is that if you actually have black with white on it, so a black background with white fonts, then that can actually create eye strain. But by having off black or grey backgrounds and white or off-white fonts on top of it, then that's actually really beneficial for your eyes, and it actually removes a lot of eye strain. So the MX Linux team who have gone with this MX dark thick borders with the look that it is absolutely brilliant. So I'm actually going to leave it as is, and I'm not going to bother about changing any of the presets for applications or the window manager or the icons. I'm just going to move straight on to the Compositor tab. Now, if your laptop or computer experiences screen tearing, so what that is if, for example, I move this window around, if it was kind of really jittery, then that is a form of screen tearing. Or actually on one of my laptops, I oftentimes will have a line that goes right across my screen. And so in this tab here, the Compositor tab, is actually a really effective way of actually solving screen tearing issues. So for example, in VBlank, if I open that up, so GLX is really good if you're running an Intel GPU, or some NVIDIA and ATI cards also run well on GLX. Now, if you actually had a newer ATI or AMD card, then Xpresent is actually brilliant for that. Or if you wanted to actually turn off your vertical blank or VBlank, that is great for systems that are running NVIDIA cards. So I'm actually going to leave mine on auto. But this function here, the Compositor, XFCE comes default with XFWM, Compositor, but if you actually change this to Compton, then quite often this will actually solve many of your screen tearing issues. So I'm just going to press apply, and it's great that this actually is an option in MX Tweak and really easy to actually apply to the system. Cool, so now I'll move over to the display tab. Now, this is another awesome thing that MX Tweak will allow you to do. You can actually scale your displays in fractional amounts. So for example, I actually changed the scaling on the Surface Pro that I use to 1.3 because, as anyone who's got a Surface Pro knows, the resolution of the screen is a really high resolution, but the screen size itself is really small, which means that all the items on my screen are quite difficult to see. They're very, very small. So by changing the scaling to 1.3, it actually enlarges everything, but not too much, and just makes life a bit easier being able to see what's on the screen. Now in XFCE, you can still actually scale your XR&R values, but it only goes up in increments of 1. So you can only go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. Whereas with this MX Tweak tool, you can actually fractionally scale. So that's really awesome, but I'm quite happy with this laptop running with a scale of 1, so I'll just leave it at 1. And if you actually had multiple monitors, in this drop down menu, you could actually choose different scales for your different monitors. So very, very cool. Right, I'll jump over to config options. And so now what I'm going to do is actually turn off this single click on desktop and also the single click in the Thunar file manager. So I'll apply that. And then move over to the other tab and just make sure that enables kernel sandbox is enabled, because that's actually a good idea to have that enabled. Cool, so that's pretty much it here. Actually, another thing I can change is my password for administrative tasks. So during my install of MX Linux, I actually created 2 passwords. One was for my user and the other one was for my administrator tasks. So hence why I actually have this option available to me. So with this option set to user, if I were to apply that, so what this means now is that I can use my user password or my login password for both my user tasks and also for any administrator task. Cool, so that's MX Tweak. I can now close out of there, and there we go. So this theme has now changed to a dark theme, which is really cool. And that's pretty much all I'm going to do in the MX Tools for now. So I'll close out of MX Tools. And jump into my apps menu and then load my settings manager. There it is there. And I'll expand this so we can see all the items. And so I'm going to work my way through these settings, and there are quite a few items that I won't actually have to tweak at all. So there's only a few here that I'm going to change. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually turn off my clipboard manager. So this down here in the panel is my clipboard manager, and as you can see, this is the command that I copy and pasted earlier, and so that's actually saved that command. Now if I was actually going to copy and paste passwords, then that would also be saved here. So I actually prefer my clipboard to not actually save my copies. So I'll go to Clipman settings, because that's the name of this application, and then I'm going to change the maximum items to 0, and then go over to history and then turn the remember history off, and then close that, and then go over to session and startup and go to application auto start, and I'll just disable this clipboard manager, and that way the next time I reboot the computer, this clipboard manager won't actually load in the background. So I can even exit out of here if I want to. Quit. Cool, so the next item will be the desktop, so I'll open that. And so here I can change my wallpapers. So for example, if I jump over to workspace 2, then as you can see, it's got the same wallpaper as my workspace 1. So I'll do that now. I'll change this to the Tartarian steps. And so this is actually applying this wallpaper to all workspaces. If I disable that, and then close out of here, and then jump into workspace 2, and right click that, and select desktop settings, change the folder to the same folder, which is backgrounds, and let's see, I'll choose a slightly different wallpaper. The sunflower field is awesome, so I'll just close out of there, and now I actually have 2 different desktops for each workspace, which is really cool for allowing me to keep track of which workspace I'm working in. So back in workspace 1, I'll reopen the settings manager and reopen desktop, and then go over to icons. Now I'll just move this to the right a little bit, and as you can see here, if you wanted to actually have your rubbish bin and say your removable devices on your desktop, then you just enable them here. Now I actually prefer to use my Thunar file manager for all of that, because for example, if I open up my Thunar file manager, here is the trash can right here. So I'll right click, create a folder, and then if I drag that to the trash, as you can see, this is actually indicating that there is something in the trash. So to empty it, you just right click, empty rubbish, and there you go, it's now empty. So that's why I don't bother having the trash can on the desktop. Cool, so I'll go back to all settings, and I'll move this to the left again. Cool, so the next thing I'm going to edit is the notifications. So I'll click on that. And so what I'm editing here, if I just click show preview, are these notifications here in the top right corner. Now, as you can see, it's a little bit hard to read what's going on there because of the theming of this notification. So I'm going to actually edit that. Firstly, I'll change the theme from the default to Greybird MX, and that's slightly darker. And I'll change the opacity and boost that all the way up to 100%, and I'll get it to disappear after say 4 seconds rather than 3 seconds, and I'll even get it to slide out. So let's have a look at what that looks like now. Much easier to read now. That is notifications. I'll go back to all settings. and continue. So the next thing I'm going to edit is the window manager. So I'll open that and then jump over to the keyboard tab. And so these are all the shortcuts that I can use to manipulate my windows. So I'll just scroll down this page here. And as you can see here, these are the tiling actions. So currently there are 4 actions that are set up with keyboard shortcuts, and super up, super down, super left, super right. So Windows key up will tile this window to the top half of the screen. Down is the bottom half, so I'm holding down my Windows key. Windows key left is going to the left, and right to the right. And if I press Windows key right, which was the last key that I pressed, it'll actually take me back to the pre-tiled state. So I'm actually going to add some shortcuts to tile the windows to the top left quarter, the top right quarter, the bottom left quarter, and the bottom right quarter. So I'll just go to this shortcut column and double click there, and then choose a tiling shortcut. Now, because I actually use a program called Tiles on my Mac, which has shortcuts for tiling, I'm actually going to use the same keyboard shortcuts that I use in that program so that I don't have to memorize any new ones. So on my keyboard, the keys U, J, K, and I, they will actually represent the quarters of my screen. So for the top left, it'll be Alt Super Key or Alt Windows U. And then for the top right, I'll double click there, Alt Super Key I, and then for the bottom left, Alt Super Key J, and then for the bottom right, Alt Super Key K. And you may have noticed that I'm actually including Alt to these shortcuts, and I'm actually going to change these shortcuts here as well to add Alt. So Super Key up is Alt Super Key up, and Alt Super Key down, Alt Super Key left arrow, and Alt Super Key right arrow. So now I can actually tile this window really easily by holding down my Alt and my Super Key, and I can go left, right, up, down, and then go around my quarters. So this is really awesome if, for example, I wanted to say open up Firefox, and I could Alt Super Key left to tile that to the left. And then if I wanted to see this window here, I could Alt Super Key I to tile it to the top right hand corner. And then if I had my terminal running, then I could Alt Super Key K. And so this is awesome. I've got 3 windows that are tiled on screen, and I've triggered them all using my shortcuts. So this is really cool if I had, say, data that I was transferring from a website into my terminal, then I could easily just tile my windows. So this sort of saves on having to stack windows, etc. And I actually don't have to install a Windows manager to do this. So absolutely brilliant. Cool, I'll close out of there, and I'll just close my Firefox, and then Alt Super Key I to return to the original state. And those are my tiling shortcuts. So now I'll move over to the Advanced tab. Now, at the moment, if I were to try to drag this window to the right-hand side, it actually tiles it over to my other workspace. See, I'm kind of moving this window just by continuing to go right, and it's going from workspace to workspace. So I actually don't want that to happen. I want to actually turn that off. So now if I move this to the far right, then it actually won't tile to the other workspace. So that's just a personal preference, but yeah, I like to turn that off. And if I wanted to tile this manually, you can still tile the windows without the shortcuts by grabbing your title bar and then just making contact either with the corners, which makes the quarter screens, or if you just go straight to the side of your screen, then that'll actually tile your windows to half screen. There is no bottom tiling function, but if you go to the top, that will actually expand your window to the maximum. So I'll just double click that to return it to the original state, and then move that to the left. And that's the window manager. So I'll go back to all settings. And so that's pretty much it for the personal section. So now I'm going to move over to the hardware section, and the first thing I'm going to edit is my advanced network configuration. So if I click on that, that opens this network connections window. You can actually access the same window if you go down to your panel and in your system tray you just right click your network connections, and as you can see I've already turned Wi-Fi off because I'm using a network cable, and then just click edit connections and that loads the same window, which is loaded by pressing that. So currently I'm using this wired connection 2, and this wired connection 1 has actually never been used, so I'm actually going to delete that. And what I'm going to do is actually edit this wired connection 2, so I'll just move this to the right, and then with the wired connection 2 selected, go to the cog to edit this connection, and then I'll move this to the right as well, and then I'll minimize my settings panel and open up a Firefox page, and then I'll just open a new tab and then close the other tabs, and then do a search for best DNS settings. And if I scroll down this page, there's actually a really good article from Frostbites. There it is there, 5 best DNS servers. And so basically by using a DNS server, then you kind of speed up your internet just slightly. So you're not actually really speeding up your internet, you're speeding up the speed in which you get served internet pages. So there's plenty of information on this page here. And right here, this first chart, let's see, I'll just expand that a little bit. So this is actually listing 5 of the best DNS servers that you can use. So a lot of people use the Google public DNS. Quite a few people also use the Cloudflare DNS server, and that's actually the one that I prefer because that is, in my experience, definitely the fastest. If you are a parent and you wanted to have parental control to actually disable certain websites from being served up on a computer that you're maybe setting up for your kids or anything like that, then you could use the clean browsing settings. But for this exercise, I'll actually show you how to set up the Google Public DNS and also the Cloudflare DNS. So I'll open a new page and do a search for Google Public DNS. There it is there. So the Google Public DNS, Google Developers, that's the page. And then click the configuration instructions. And then just scroll down this page here. And so these are the addresses that I want to enter into my network connections. So I'll go to this editing wired connections, and firstly I'll rename it. So I'll change it from wired connection to Google DNS, and then jump into my IPv4 settings and change the method to automatic addresses only. And so now I want to actually copy these 2 addresses into my DNS servers field. So I'll just type them out. So it's 8.8.8.8, and then separate them with a comma and no space, and then 8.8.4.4. So that's my IPv4 settings sorted. I'll go to my IPv6 settings and then change the method to automatic addresses only. And I'll actually just copy and paste these 2 addresses. So I'll firstly copy the first one, copy, and then right click paste, put in a comma to separate them with no space, and then copy this address as well, copy, and then paste. Save, and there we go. I now actually have a connection that is utilizing the Google DNS server settings. Now before I go on, I should actually mention that in this Frostbites page there is a typo, because on this page they actually put a space after the comma, which shouldn't be there. So just thought I'd mention that. Cool, so that's the Google DNS. Now I'll open a new tab, and this time open up the Cloudflare DNS page. So it's 1.1.1.1 is the URL. And then I'll click on this link to the DNS page. Now if you were tiling your page to half screen and you were, say, using a laptop that has a smaller screen, as you can see, this little button disappears. So if that's the case, you just double click the title bar to maximize the window, and then you can press the button from there. And then scroll down the page, and here is the Linux instructions. So I'll tile that back to half screen and then go back to my network connections and then press plus to add a new connection, and I'm going to add another Ethernet connection. So you can also add Wi-Fi or mobile broadband, but yes, I'm using cable internet, so I'll select Ethernet and then press create. And so I actually noticed that the device field here is blank. So what I'll do is I'll just save that and then go to my Google DNS settings, which I know do work, and then go to the cog settings and notice that the device that I'm using for my Ethernet cable is F1. So that's that one there. So I'll just cancel out of there and then go back to this new connection, go back to the cog and then change the device to F1. There we go. Cool, so firstly I'll name this connection. So I'm going to call this Cloudflare DNS and then jump over to the IPv4 settings tab, change the method from automatic to automatic addresses only. And then I'm going to type in these two addresses here, the 1.1.1.1 and 1.0.0.1 into this field here, the DNS service field. So 1.1.1.1, comma, with no space, 1.0.0.1. Cool, and then jump over to my IPv6 settings tab, change the method to automatic addresses only. And this time I'm going to copy this whole line here because as you can see, there is a comma separating the two addresses with no space. So that's the correct format. So I'll right click that, copy, and then right click, paste into this DNS servers field, press save, and there we go. I now have Cloudflare DNS and Google DNS. Now, if I actually wanted to use my ISP to serve up my web pages, then to go about that, you just press plus to add the connection, and then I'll select Ethernet, change the device to F1, and then the connection name, I could either leave that as Ethernet connection 1 or default ISP, and then press save. And now I actually have all of those options. So now to actually get these to activate and register on the system, I'll then go to my panel and then just left click and disconnect, and then click again, and now I can select whichever DNS server that I require. So I'm going to choose the Cloudflare DNS, and as you can see, you are now connected. So there we go, it's all done. Now with Cloudflare, there is actually an app that you can use, but I prefer to do it manually because, I don't know, it's just simpler and quicker. And to actually check if the network connections is actually active, I'll go back to that page and scroll down and then right click my network connection down here and then select connection information. And as you can see here, these are the Cloudflare settings, so 1.1.1.1 and 1.0.0.1, and also for the IPv6 settings, these are the correct settings. So this is that address here before the comma, and then this is the second address after the comma. Cool, so that's all up and running. So I can close out of network connections and I'll close out of Firefox and then reopen my settings manager and move on to the next item. So if I actually had Bluetooth in my computer, then this is how I'd manage my Bluetooth, but the laptop that I'm using actually doesn't have Bluetooth. As you can see, when I try to load it, it says this probably means there are no Bluetooth adapters, which is absolutely correct for my system. So I'll just close out of there and move on to the next item. So I'm not going to worry about color profiles or display. I'll just move straight over to the keyboard. So now I'll go to the application shortcuts. And so these are keyboard shortcuts that I can set to launch applications, which is really good if I have applications that I use all the time. Then I can open them by using a keyboard shortcut on my keyboard, so I don't have to use my mouse all the time, which is really, really handy. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually edit my Thunar or my file browser. So Super Key E or Windows Key E is the current shortcut to open up a Thunar file browser, but I'm actually going to change that to actually include Alt in that keyboard shortcut. So Alt Super Key E. And the reason why I do that is because sometimes when you press Super Key, it'll actually open up your apps menu. Whereas if you go Alt Super Key, then that doesn't actually open up the apps menu. Cool. And I'm also going to create a shortcut to launch Firefox, because Firefox is one of the applications that I use all the time. So rather than having to go into the panel and then launching it by clicking on it, I'm going to create a shortcut. So I'll just press Add and then type in the command Firefox. And if you wanted to know the command to launch applications, then all you have to do is go into your apps menu, find the application that you want to create a shortcut for, right click it, go to edit application, and it'll show you the command here. So Firefox is the command, and this is an extra command after Firefox. I think it's creating a new tab if you have Firefox already open. So this is the command prior to the space that you want to use. So I'll just cancel out of there. So that indeed is Firefox. Then I'll press OK. And then the command to launch Firefox will be Alt Super Key F. And let's test that. Alt Super Key F. And there we go. That's launched Firefox. So that's how easy it is to create keyboard shortcuts in MX Linux. Cool, so I'll go back to the all settings, and the next item will be the mouse and touchpad. So I'm currently only using a touchpad, so I won't worry about my mouse settings. I'll just jump over to the touchpad tab, and pretty much the only thing I'm going to change here is the scrolling mode. So at the moment it's set to circular scrolling, but I'm going to change that to two-fingered scrolling. And the reason why I do that is because although circular scrolling does work, sometimes I'll find when I'm surfing the net or doing certain functions, my two-fingered scrolling stops working. So if I've got it set to two-fingered scrolling here, then that generally means my trackpad will always work. Cool, that's done. So now I'll move over to the theme tab. And because I'm using a dark theme, I'm going to change the cursor to a light cursor. And I'm also going to increase the cursor size. So I'll just move this up, and basically when it hits 29, there we go. Cool, and then go back to all settings, and that's the mouse and touchpad sorted. So next is the power manager. Cool, so currently when the power button is pressed, if I press my power button on my keyboard, it brings up these options here, but I actually want my computer to shut down as soon as I press my power button, because if I wanted those options to appear, then I can easily just go to this logout button on the far right of my panel, and that brings up these options here. So I'll change the when power button is pressed to shutdown. Cool, I'm not going to bother about anything else here. I'll just move over to system. And so system sleep mode, I'm actually going to change that from hibernate, because I don't use hibernate, and change that to suspend. And I'll get the system to go into this power saving mode when the computer is inactive for, say, the minimum, which is 15 minutes, I believe. There it is. And that's on battery. Basically, I'm doing that because my battery is pretty useless. Actually, I don't even know if it will last 15 minutes on battery, hence why I've chosen the minimum there. Now, laptop lid, when the laptop lid is closed, I'll actually get my computer to go into suspend mode. And then if it ever hits the critical power level, I'll get my computer to ask what I need to do, and that way I can actually save work if I need to. Cool, and then I'll move over to the plugged in options. And so system sleep mode, I'll get it also to go into suspend, that's already been selected. When it's been inactive for, and this time I can actually boost this all the way up to say 2 hours. And when the laptop lid is closed, I'll get that to suspend, and I'll leave the critical power options the same. Cool, and then I'll jump into the display options, and I've actually turned this off during the recording of this video so that my screen doesn't automatically go into blank mode or anything like that. But if you wanted to actually edit those, then on battery I actually leave all of these settings the same, but I'd actually move this down to say 44 seconds is good. And so after 44 seconds on battery, if I, for example, lose power or I'm not plugged in, then the screen will reduce to 20%, and that will be a very quick indicator to me that I'm running on battery and not plugged in. So that's usually what I do there. And then in the plugged in section, then I can actually boost these all the way up quite a bit. So I'll get the screen to switch off after say 55 minutes. And then I'll get the display to go to sleep after say 44 minutes, but I'll get it to go blank after say 22 minutes. Cool, and I won't actually reduce the brightness. Great, so I'm done there. So let's now move to the security tab and automatically lock the session. I'll get the computer to lock the session automatically when the screensaver is activated, and delay locking after screensaver for say 2 minutes. And that way I can instantly go back into a session if I move my trackpad or anything like that, or go back into my session within 2 minutes of my screensaver being activated. And then lock screen when system is going to sleep, I'll leave that enabled. Cool, so that's all I'll do in the Power Manager, but for now I'll actually go and disable that just for the remainder of this video, and then I'll turn this back on when I'm finished, and then go back to all settings. Right, so next I'll move to the print settings. If I click on that, and the cool thing about MX Linux, or Linux in general, is that most of the time you don't actually have to install any drivers to get any of your network printers to work. And if I wanted to test a printer, I just right click it, go to properties, and then I could print a test page. But I do know that these printers work, or that printer in particular works. So those are the print settings. I'll close out of there and then move on to the next item. So that's pretty much it for the hardware section. Now I'm going to move to the system section and then click on firewall configuration to actually turn on my firewall. Try that again. Right, so that's not actually working. Let's try launching it from the apps menu. Nope, that's not working either. Let's try that again. Firewall configuration, let's see what it's called. Edit application, and it's GUFW, so I'll just copy that. And then open up my terminal window, and then I'll just reinstall it. Probably the easiest thing to do. Sudo apt install, Control-Shift-V to paste, enter. Throw in my password, and it's saying that it is actually installed, so I'll try running it from here. Sudo paste. There we go, it's actually loaded it from there, but it's got these messages here. System has not been booted with system D as init system, so it can't operate. Failed to connect to bus, host is down. So basically if I reboot into system D, then this firewall will be all operational. So I'll actually turn it on first. There we go, so I now have a firewall turned on, and I'll actually have to reboot into system D for this to work. And I'll get into that momentarily. For now, I'll just leave it as is, and I'll actually show you how to actually boot into system D, which is what I normally would boot into because of the applications that I use. So I'll just exit out of terminal and cancel out of my launcher, go back to the apps menu, and so that's the firewall configuration. And the very last thing I'm going to do is in the other section, click on adblock. And so what this does is actually add new entries into your host file, so that when you're, say, surfing the internet or anything like that, then you actually have this ad blocker or your host files that will specify when you're web browsing to actually block adverts or these adverts that appear in these lists here. So all you have to do is enable all of these lists, click OK. That'll actually add the lists to your host file. So absolutely awesome, and you sort of saves on having to install ad blockers in any of the web browsers that you're using. So there we go, the host files have been updated. Restart your browser to see the changes. And that's pretty much it for the settings manager. So I'll close out of there now. And so what I'm going to do now is a few more system tweaks. So I'll open up my Thunar file browser. And so what I'm going to do now is actually configure this so it's a little bit more useful for my needs. So I'll click on Edit up here and then Preferences. And I'll just move this to the right a little bit. And so I'll get the view settings. I'll change the view new folders using and change that to list view. So now if I open up a new file browser window, it opens up in this list view. So I'll close out of there. And I'll also get this to remember the view settings of each folder. So, that's actually changed that to list view. Cool, so for example, if I were in my pictures directory, and I'll just create a folder or a couple of folders. So this is currently in list view. So if I went up to view and changed that to icon view, so this would be easier for when I'm looking at graphics in my picture directory, then it'll actually remember the setting for the pictures directory, and I could probably do the same for my videos directory. I can change that to icon view, but when I'm in my home directory or even my documents directory, then it'll stay with list view. So I find that a little bit easier to work. Cool, and back in the file manager preferences, I could change the size of these icons here if I needed to, but I'm not going to bother. I'm just going to close that because this is perfectly fine size wise. Cool, so next I'll go to the view settings. So what I'm going to do now is actually make these links clickable, because right now it's showing the file path, but I can't actually click on them. So I can change that easily by going to View, Location Selector, and change it from Path Bar Style to Toolbar Style. And now if I say navigate into that folder there, I can just go back to my previous folder by clicking these links here. So very handy. Cool, and that's pretty much it for the Thunar File Manager. Now it's called Thunar File Manager because this is actually the Thunar File Manager. So you're probably used to using the Nemo File Manager if you are using KDE, but Thunar is what comes packaged with this XFCE desktop environment. Cool, so I'll close out of my File Manager, and that's pretty much it for the File Manager. Right, so the next thing I'm going to do is open up my Thunar File Manager, and I'm actually going to create some folders for items such as wallpapers that I download, any icons that don't come with my application launchers, and also for my app images. Cool, so I'll actually jump into my file system here, and I'm going to create some folders in my file system. So if I go to File, I can't actually create any folders or documents because all of these directories here in my file system are actually locked to the root of my system. So me as the user, I don't actually have the permissions to actually edit any of these folders in here, but that's really easy to solve. All you have to do is just right click on the file system directory and then open root Thunar here, throw in your password. And so this is essentially the same lot of files here, but these are now all open as my root account. So I can now close this file system directory, and I'll just tile this to the left. And then if I go to File, Create Folder, that option is now enabled. So I'll create a folder and I'll just call this system, and then open that folder, and then create my directories for my icons, wallpapers, and app images. So I'll just right click and create a folder, and I'll call this AppImages, and then create another folder for my icons, and then create another folder for my wallpapers. Cool, so currently these are all locked to the root of my system. So for example, if I closed my Thunar file browser, and if I reopen my Thunar file browser, and I'll tile that to the left, and then navigate back to my system folder, all of these folders are still currently locked to the root of my system. So for example, in my wallpapers directory, I can't actually drag images in here yet because I'd actually get an error message saying that this folder is actually locked and I don't have the permissions to actually add anything to this folder. I could right click and open root Thunar here every time I wanted to unlock it, but there's actually another way of unlocking the folder. And that is by opening up a terminal window, and I'll tile this to the right. And so I actually want to change the ownership of all of these folders here. So what I'll do is I'll run the command in my terminal, sudo, and that's to run as a super user, and then chown or change owner. And then after a space, I'll actually enter my username, which is right here. So Control-Shift-C for copy, and then Control-Shift-V for paste. And then I'll go to the end of that word and then put in a colon. And so that's my username. So then after the colon is my group name, which actually is the same as my username. So I'll Control-Shift-V for paste again, and then put a space in. And now I just want to type in the addresses for each of these folders. So /system, and you can see the pathway right here. So system and then /AppImages, and then put in a space, and then I'll put in the second address, which is /system /icons, and then put in a space, and then type in the third address, which is of course system /wallpapers. Now if I press enter and then throw in my password, and it's saying that I've incorrectly typed in my system wallpapers because I actually didn't put a / at the start. So I'll just copy this command again. Control-Shift-C for copy and then paste. And this time I'll put a space in and then put in my /. So it's system /wallpapers. And there we go. So now these folders are all unlocked. So if I enter that folder there, I can now create folders and create documents and actually drag files into this folder here if I wanted to. Now I'll just go back, and I should actually mention that normally it's not recommended to store your app images in a system folder, and the reason being is because quite often you'll get app images that are actually created or developed by people that are not part of the original software's development team. So being independent, you just never know when some extra code might be written into the app image. So for example, some of the unwanted code that might be part of an app image that has been written outside of the actual official applications software development team, it may include malware, or even in the worst case scenario, a Trojan to get into your computer. So hence why it's not actually normally a good idea to save your app images in your system folder. But in the next step, I'm actually going to show you how I go about sandboxing applications. So what a sandbox does is it actually isolates applications from the rest of your system. And there's a really good application that we'll get to in just a moment called Firejail. And so because I'm doing that, hence why I've actually created an app images folder in my system folders. So normally if you weren't actually going to use Firejail, then it would actually be recommended just to create an app images folder in your home directory. But I'm actually going to delete that because I have my system app images folder. So now what I'll do is I'll actually drag these into my side panel, and I'll just wait till it gets to a single line so that it actually will create a shortcut. So now I have a shortcut in my side panel, and I'll do the same for my icons as well, and also my wallpapers. So I can easily now access these folders if I need to. And that's pretty much it. So I'll exit out of my terminal and close my Thunar file browser and move on to the next step, which is to download a program that will actually handle all of my app images. So I'll open up Firefox and I'll actually use my shortcut. So Alt Windows key F, and I'll open a new tab and close the other tabs. and then do a search for AppImageLauncher. And so the GitHub for the Assassin's AppImageLauncher application, that's the one we want. So I'll open that. And if I scroll right down the page, you'll see a little chart. There it is there. If I expand this window so we can see it easier. And from Debian 10 and newer, you can actually use this app image here, which is the Bionic version. And that works for both AMD and i386. Now, I'm not sure if it works for ARM as well, but I'd assume it would actually work. Cool, so I'm going to jump into the releases page and then scroll down here till I find the Bionic version. So Bionic AMD 64, that is the type of system that this laptop is. So I'll open that and I'll just save this to my downloads folder. Actually, no, I'll download this into my AppImages and save that. And so that's now downloaded. So I'll open up my AppImages folder and I'll minimize Firefox and then double click this AppImageLauncher deb package. As you can see here, it's a deb package. So this is the installer for AppImageLauncher. And as you can see, all the dependencies are satisfied, which is good. I'll just click install package and then I'll enable this automatically close after the changes have been successfully applied. I'll open up the terminal with this little arrow next to terminal and then let the AppImageLauncher application install. Now, while this is installing, I should actually mention that if I jump back into Firefox and then scroll up the page and have a look at the issues tab for AppImageLauncher, and if I type in systemd and then scroll down this page here, and as you can see here, support other init systems than systemd. And the reason why I'm showing you this is because AppImageLauncher only works with a system that's been booted into systemd. So someone else has actually asked the same question, whether or not the developer will actually create a version of AppImageLauncher that runs in a non-systemd system. And as you see, if you just scroll down here, he pretty much says no, he's not going to, and he chooses to use systemd for both being widespread and making running user level daemons a lot easier than whatever else he could find. So I thought I'd just mention that because after the install, I'm actually going to have to reboot my computer into systemd. Now, I actually had a similar issue with running the Firewall. The Firewall also required systemd to be running, so I'll actually reboot into systemd. So that is now installed. I can close out of the GDB package installer and I'll close Firefox. And so that's now installed. I'll close out of my Thunar file browser. And then to reboot into systemd, you can either reboot your system, then at the first splash screen for MX Linux, there is actually an option to change to systemd there, or there's actually a much easier way, which is to open up your apps menu and then go to MX Tools and load that. And then right here are the boot options. So I'll click that and load the boot options. And so currently it's going to boot to the MX non-systemd version of MX Linux. And to change that, all you have to do is select systemd right here. So this is version 5.10.0.10, which is the latest kernel that was installed when I did the update. And then enable last boot choice. So I'll select that. And I'll actually get the menu to time out a little bit quicker, which will save me 2 seconds of time. And then while I'm in here, I'll actually change the splash theme and I'll change that to Dandelion MX because that's quite a nice little animation. And then apply that. And so this will apply the changes. So here's a simple breakdown of the difference between systemd and a non-systemd boot up sequence. So when you boot up your system, a process called init, or a program called init, actually executes and manages all of the background processes that start up on your Linux system, like checking file systems, starting swapping, and checking for peripherals that might be attached, like hard drives or USB drives or anything like that. So in a non-systemd system, it's actually a simpler approach, where all the init files are shell scripts that get called up based on symlinks, etc. Now, this minimal approach, although simpler and less resource intensive, actually isn't very flexible, and as a result, over time has actually been abandoned by the majority of Linux operating systems in favor of systemd. So systemd is a lot more flexible due to its more complex method of init execution, and it supports things like parallelization or faster boot and other really cool things like socket management, process tracking, mounting of file systems, and dependency based service control, and so on. But being a more complex process, systemd could increase the potential for system bugs. However, in my experience, I've never actually experienced any issues running MX Linux in systemd, so hence why I'm quite happy to run my system in systemd. Now, I thought I'd mention this because the debate has been quite fierce between people who love systemd and people who despise systemd. So I thought I'd just mention this now, although the debate has kind of been quelled quite a bit these days because most people that are running systemd systems haven't actually experienced the issues that people were worried about in the earlier days. So back to it. Cool, so the changes have been successfully applied. I can OK out of there and then close out of the MX boot options and then close out of here. And then what I'm going to do now is reboot my system, which will essentially reboot into systemd. Cool, so I've now rebooted into systemd. So I can now configure my AppImageLauncher. So if I jump into my apps menu and then do a search for AppImageLauncher. There it is there, AppImageLauncher settings. If I open that, and so what I want to do is actually change this so it will store in my AppImages folder. So I'll go to computer and then / find my system folder and then select AppImages. Click choose, and so that will now store all of my app images in my app images folder. So I'll OK there, and that's pretty much it. So the cool thing about AppImageLauncher is you can actually use it to update your app images as well as it'll actually also handle creating launches in your apps menu. So to demonstrate how this works, I'll actually download an app image. So Alt super key F to launch Firefox. And then in the address bar, I'll just do a search for Joplin app. And so Joplin app, this is the application that comes as a app image. If I go to download the app, then right here is the app image, which is the only version of Joplin that you can get for Linux, which essentially means that this should actually be quite a safe application to use. But that said, I'm still going to sandbox it to isolate it from the rest of my system. So I'll just click on get it on Linux and then save file, and I'll just save this to my downloads folder. And then I'll open up a couple of file browser windows, and let's see how long this takes to download. And then I'll jump into my downloads directory, so that's still downloading. And there we go, that's done. So this is the Joplin app image, which is essentially the Joplin application. So if I now close out of Firefox and then go to my app images folder in my system directory, and now if I double click this app image, it will launch the AppImageLauncher, and I can either run it once or press this button, integrate and run. And so when I press this, this will actually move the app image into the folder that I specified earlier and integrate this app image into my system. So I'll press that, and as you can see, it's now moved the app image over. as well as launched the application. So this should take a few seconds to launch. And so while that's launching, I'll close out of this downloads folder. And there we go, the Joplin application has launched. So I'll now close out of Joplin, and I can close this AppImages directory and then jump into my apps menu and do a search for Joplin. And here is the launcher for Joplin. So currently there's actually no icon that's attached to this. So I'll just right click that and then select edit application. And normally you wouldn't have to do this with most applications, but some applications you may need to do it with. So I'll just click this no icon button and wait a few seconds while the icon list gets loaded. And there we go. So I'll just select the Joplin application icon and then click OK, and that's now loaded it here so I can save it. And now if I open up my apps menu and do a search for Joplin, it now has an icon attached to it. So there we go, that's how easy it is now to use AppImageLauncher, and it actually will move everything into the right place and also create a launcher in the apps menu. Cool. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it's actually a good idea to sandbox app images if they reside in your system folders, and also any other application that you may wish to sandbox if you're not too sure about the developer's intentions. So the next program will actually allow us to sandbox our applications. So if I jump back into my apps menu and then load the MX package installer, and then jump over to the stable repository tab. Cool, and then do a search for Firejail in the search field. There we go, and I'm going to install Firejail and Firejail profiles and also FireTools, which is the graphic user interface for Firejail. Cool, then I'll just simply press the install button. And so these are the programs, Firejail profiles and FireTools. I'll just press OK here and then let the install take place. So I'll speed up this little bit of the video, it shouldn't actually take too long, and then rejoin you once the installations have completed. And we're back, so that has completed. I can OK out of there and then close my MX package installer. And now to actually run Firejail, it's really easy. You just have to jump into your apps menu and then do a search for Firejail and then load FireTools, which is actually the graphic user interface. And now if I wanted to run a Firejailed version of Firefox, I can just run it from here. So these are some of the profiles that are included with Firejail. So what I'll do is I'll actually load FireTools, the setup. So I'll just double click that and I'll move this to the right a little bit. And then if I run Firefox from here, as you can see here, it's now running a Firejailed or a sandboxed version of Firefox. So this is now isolated from the rest of my system. So anything I do here won't ever actually affect any of the rest of my system. So that's really cool. I'll close out of Firefox and there you go, it's disappeared from here. Now, if I was actually going to try to run Firefox from my apps menu or from my launcher, then as you can see here, this instance of Firefox is not actually sandboxed from the rest of my system. So to actually sandbox something from the rest of your system, all you have to do is go to your apps menu, find the application launcher. There it is there, and then right click that, select edit application, and then I'll move this to the left. And then in the command line, all you have to do is at the start of the line, type in the command Firejail space and then save that. And now if I run Firefox from my apps menu, There we go, it's actually running Firefox in a Firejail sandbox. So that's how easy it is to add an application into a Firejail sandbox. So absolutely brilliant way of securing your system, especially if you were using applications that you weren't too sure about the developer's intentions or anything like that. So that's a normal application. If I close out of there. Now the thing is, I'll actually have to also change my shortcut commands. So if I jump back into my apps menu and then load my settings manager and then jump into keyboard, then application shortcuts, I just have to make sure that I change this command here from Firefox to Firejail Firefox. So I'll double click that and then go to the start of the line and add in Firejail and then OK. And I can close out of my settings manager. And now if I launch Firefox using my shortcuts, there you go, it's actually loaded Firefox in a Firejail sandbox. So that's pretty much all you have to do. So I'll close out of there. And now what I'll do is I'll actually jump into my apps menu and do a search for Joplin, because I definitely want to make sure that I sandbox my app images. So all I have to do is right click that and then select edit application. And so what I'll do is go to the start of the command line and type in Firejail and then -- app image and then space, and then I'll save that. And now if I run Joplin from my apps menu, there you go, it's actually loaded Joplin in a sandbox. And so now all I have to do is ensure that anytime I download and install an app image, I add Firejail space -- app image space before the launch command, and that way any of my app images will always be sandboxed from the rest of my system. So that keeps everything protected and safeguarded. Cool, so that's Firejail. That's how easy it is to use that. So I can close out of there, and I'll also quit out of FireTools and move on to the next item. So the next application I'm going to install, so I'll install this using the MX package installer. And I'll go to the stable repository. And so the next application I'm going to install is an application called Redshift. So what Redshift is a blue light blocker. So as the day gets on and into the night, then it's actually a good idea to block the blue light in your screen, which will mean that when you are working late into the night, your brain isn't being tricked into thinking it's still daytime if it still had the blue light or a normal screen showing. So by using Redshift, it's sort of similar to a program that you'd use in Windows called Flux, or if you're using a Mac, you'd use a program called Nightlight, which is part of the Mac OS system settings. So Redshift is the same as both of those in the sense that it will actually decrease the amount of blue light and increase the amount of red light, which will allow you to actually work on a computer late into the night. And then as soon as you log out of your computer and decide to go to sleep, then you'll actually find it much easier to go to sleep than if you don't use a program called Redshift. So what I'll do is I'll select Redshift GTK and then press install. So this will not only install Redshift GTK, which is the system tray icon. If I were to just install Redshift without the GTK, then I wouldn't know when it's running and when it's not running. And having the system tray icon is very handy because you can turn off Redshift if you're working in applications that require you to actually have accurate colors on your screen. So next I'll press OK. And this is going to install Python 3xDG, Redshift, the application, and the system tray application called Redshift GTK. So I'll allow this to install and speed up this a little bit of the video and then rejoin you once the installation has completed. Cool, that's completed. So I'll now press OK. And then jump into my apps menu and do a search for Redshift. There it is there. And then I'll just click that, and there we go. The system tray icon has appeared, so I can now change the settings from here. So if I open that, and then I'll get this to auto start. So every time I now boot up my machine, it'll actually run this Redshift application. So it's kind of a set it and forget it type scenario. But if I actually go to this Redshift icon and then click info, as you can see, the location hasn't been picked up on my computer because I actually need another program to pick up my location. So it will actually render the correct colors for my locale. So I'll close out of there. And then in the search bar, and I'm still in the stable repository, I'll do a search for Geoclue. And I'll select Geoclue 2.0 and then install. And then OK. And this should actually be a very, very quick installation because it's a pretty tiny program. And there we go, it's done. So I can OK out of there and then close out of my MX package installer. And so to actually get Geoclue to actually pick up my location and then give the location to Redshift, I'll actually have to log out and log back into my system. So I'm going to do that right now. And I don't actually have to do a restart. I'm just going to log out and then log back in. Cool, so I've logged back in, and now if I go to my Redshift application and go to info, it's now picked up the color temperature that is relevant to my locale, and it's also picked up my location. So now I have Redshift enabled. I'll close out of there, but what I'll do is for the rest of this video, I'm actually going to disable that just so I have a normal colored screen. Cool, and then move on to the next item. So what I'm going to do next, if I open up my file browser window, and then I'll grab a hard drive. So I've got an external hard drive here, and I'll just plug this into my laptop. And there it is there. So right now, both of these hard drives here, this is actually my Windows hard drive because I'm dual booting this computer with Windows. So I'm going to leave that one alone. But this one here is the hard drive I've just plugged in. So if I actually wanted to access any of the files or folders on this hard drive, I'd actually have to mount it. So to mount it, all you have to do is click it, and it's now mounted. Normally you'd actually have to also put in your password, but because I've already mounted my project SSD drive, which is a extra hard drive I have in this computer that I use for my projects, then that's already loaded. So it didn't ask me for a password to load this drive. Now, if you had, say, multiple hard drives in your computer or on your desktop computer, and you wanted them to actually auto-load every time you boot it up, like for example, if I booted up my computer now, I'd have to go back into my Thunar file manager, click on my hard drive that I want to mount every time I wanted to access extra hard drives. So by auto mounting hard drives, I actually don't have to do this. So what I'll do first is I'll unmount this external hard drive. There we go. And then jump into my apps menu, and I'm going to install a program. So I'll open up the MX package installer, and then go to the stable repo. And it's saying that my internet is not available, which is not true. I'll try that again. There we go. Cool, and then in the search bar, I'm going to do a search for Gnome Disk Utility. There it is there. So I'll just select that and then press install. And then OK. And I'll just speed up a little bit of the video and rejoin you once the installation has completed. Fantastic, that has completed. So I'll press OK here and then close the MX package installer and then jump into my apps menu. and do a search for disks. There it is there. So this is the program that I just installed. And so this is my internal hard drive, or where my file system and everything exist. And this is the SSD drive, which is this one here, which I actually had to mount manually so I could save the simple screen recorder recordings of the session onto. So what I'll do is I'll actually get this to auto load. So to do that, at the moment you can see with this play button or triangle, it's actually currently mounted. So to actually auto mount this SSD drive, you just have to go to these cogs to edit the partition options, and then select edit mount options, and then turn off the user session defaults, and then in the display name give it a name. So I'll call this project SSD, and I could even edit this mount point here, but I won't bother doing that. I'll just leave this all as is, press OK, throw in the old password. Oops, wrong password. And so now whenever I boot up my computer, this project SSD internal extra hard drive will actually automatically mount. Now, if I wanted to do the same for this Seagate hard drive that I just plugged in, then as you can see, it's not mounted. So all I do is go to the cog settings and then edit mount options, turn off the user session defaults. So I'll give this the same name, Seagate 500. And then press OK, throw in the old password. And so now whenever I reboot my computer, this external hard drive will actually auto mount. Now if I wanted to mount it from here also, I could just press this mount selected partition. And so now this hard drive has mounted. So that's how to auto mount hard drives. Cool, so I'll close out of my disks utility. And I'll actually unplug this as well. And move to the next step. So I'm pretty much almost there. What I'm going to do now is actually clean up my desktop, because pretty much the more things you have on your desktop, the more your RAM has to be utilized to render all the items that you have on your desktop. So the cleaner your desktop is, essentially the less RAM is required by your system. So I'm going to move these two items off the desktop into my home folder. So I'll just right click that, create a folder, and I'll just call this MX info. There we go. And then I'll just grab both of these, right click cut, and then in the MX info folder, right click and paste. Where's the paste? There it is, paste into folder. Cool, and also this NVIDIA removal command, which is actually quite handy to know, because if I were ever having issues with my NVIDIA card not working, or if it was overheating too much or anything like that, then by running this command, you can actually uninstall the NVIDIA driver. So this is good information to keep. I'll also move that into my MX info folder. There we go. So that's the system now cleaned up. I'll close out of my Thunar file manager. And so the next application I'm going to install is a brilliant application for doing system cleans and all that kind of thing. Now, there is actually an application in your MX Tools application called Cleanup, and this is absolutely brilliant as well. And so this is actually a really simple way of cleaning things. All you have to do is leave all of these defaults as is, and then just click apply. And so that's cleaned up 96 megabytes from the system. But I actually have another application that I like to use, and it's called Stacer. So I'll open up my apps menu and then go to the MX package installer, and then go to the stable repo, and then do a search for Stacer. There it is there. So I'll select that, press install, and then OK. And so this shouldn't actually take too long to do, so I'll fast forward this a little bit and rejoin you as soon as it's completed. Fantastic, that's completed, so I'll OK out of that, and then close my MX package installer, jump into my apps menu, do a search for Stacer, there it is there, and I'll just enter to start it up. Now this is an absolutely brilliant application, so I'm not actually going to go right into how to use it, but it's very, very simple to use. But firstly, I'm just going to go to the settings. And so every time I load Stacer, I actually want it to start up on a specific page. So I'm going to get it to start up on the system cleaner, which is this page here. And I'll also get it to just quit without having to confirm quitting. Cool, so now I'll go over to the system cleaner. And to use the system cleaner is so simple. You just select all, press the search button, and then select all, and then clean. Throw in your password, and there we go, 189.6 megabytes were cleaned from the system. So it's a very, very simple but effective system cleaner, and there's also a whole bunch of other things you can do. There's even system resource graphs to show you what's going on, but I have this Conky that's pretty much showing similar information. So that is Stacer. Right, so that's pretty much the settings all taken care of. So what I'm going to do now is open up my apps menu and then load the MX Tools application. So I'll load the snapshot, throw in the old password. And so firstly I'd give it a name. So let's see, MX21. Oh. Hello. What are you doing? Yeah, this is what I'm doing. I'm creating a snapshot of MX Linux. Is that cool? Yeah, all good now? Okay, out you go. Out you go. You too. Out you go. You too. Excuse the interruption. Cool, so where was I? That's right, I was creating a name of the snapshot. So MX21 and then hyphen, I could call this stemmed 01. So this is the snapshot that I'm creating prior to actually theming and downloading and installing all the applications, which is the next episode, so stay tuned for that. So then I'll just click next. And if I wanted to actually distribute this snapshot to other people, then I'd just select this resetting accounts, and that will actually tick all of these boxes here, which actually excludes these folders from being saved as part of the snapshot. But I'm actually going to preserve my accounts because I'll be the only one using this, and then press next. And so now it's actually going to work out the size of the snapshot. And so this function is really cool because it means that I can actually install everything I've done here as is, as a snapshot onto other computers. Very much a time saver and a brilliant addition to the MX Tools applications. So I'm going to speed up this little bit of the video and then rejoin you as soon as it has completed. Cool, that has completed. So as you can see here, there was a warning, not all BIOSes will be able to boot this device because this is a hybrid system, meaning it's got 2 GPUs, and if I were to install this onto other machines that didn't have a hybrid system, then it may not be able to boot into those. But one of my other laptops does actually have a hybrid system with an NVIDIA graphics card, which actually uses the exact same driver as this laptop. So that's pretty much it. I'll go OK here. And so this is where the snapshot is. So it's in home snapshot. So if I close out of there, and then close that, and then open up a file browser window, and then go to File, System, then Home, then Snapshot. This is my ISO image that I just created. So I can now essentially burn this to a USB drive by either using this tool in MX Tools called Live USB Maker, or I could use another program such as Ventoy to just drag the image onto a USB drive, or I could even use Rufus to create a live USB drive. But having this Live USB Maker as part of the MX Tools is really cool because you don't have to actually download or install any different programs. Cool, so okay to that, and I'll just close out of my file browser window. So the very last thing I'm going to do is actually create a system snapshot. So I'll run the program Timeshift. There it is there. And because this is the first time I've used Timeshift, I actually have to use the setup wizard. So my file system that I'm using is ButterFS, this one here. And I can open this help if I wanted to get more information. Now, if I had have installed MX Linux using the ext4 file system, then I'd have to use rsync, but because I'm using ButterFS, I can actually use this function here. And so this has selected my ButterFS hard drive, so I'll just click next, and I can create a daily snapshot if needed, but I'm actually not going to, because I'm going to install a program after I actually set up my Timeshift to actually create auto snapshots, but we'll get to that. So I'll leave this disabled and then click next. And then if I were to actually include my home subvolumes, then as I actually start using my system and downloading files and images and all that kind of thing, and working on videos and anything like that, then my home subvolumes will actually become quite large. So my snapshots that I'd create would actually be ginormous, which would actually double the amount of space that's being used on my home drive with my snapshots. So I'm actually going to exclude my home subvolume and then just leave this one enabled, which is the ButterFS Q groups. Then click next and then finish. So to create a snapshot, it's as easy as clicking this create button. And there we go, a snapshot has been created. So it was that quick. If I was using ext4 and rsync, then these snapshots take a lot longer to actually create, even though it's worth doing. But using ButterFS, just having this almost instantaneous system snapshot functionality is absolutely brilliant. So to name it, I'll just go over to the comments and double click in that space there, and I'll just call it MX21 stemmed 01, and then press enter. And so I know now that this is the snapshot that I have right up until this point here, before I've actually downloaded and installed programs and actually themed it properly. So that's how quick it is to create snapshots. So I'll actually exit out of there. So what I'm going to do now is actually install another program. So I'll launch Firefox, so that's Alt Superkey F. And then I'll open a new tab and close the other one. And then do a search for Timeshift Auto Snap ATP with hyphens in between each word. So Timeshift Auto Snap APT. And so this is the page here from Wamuchel's GitHub. So I'll open that and then scroll down the page to find the instructions. And so because I've already installed Timeshift, I don't actually need to download and install that. I'll just keep moving down, and these are the instructions here that I need to put into my terminal. So I'll open up my terminal window, Control Alt T, and I'll Alt Windows right arrow key to tile that to the right. And then I'll triple click the first line to get the whole line, Control C to copy, and then in terminal, Control Shift V to paste, and then press enter. Cool, and then I'll get the next line. I'll just triple click to get the whole line, Control C to copy, and Control Shift V to paste. And so now we're in the Timeshift AutoSnap apt folder. And then I'll triple click the third line, Control C to copy, and then right click, paste. Throw in the old password. And this will actually install the program. I'll try again. And that's now installed. And that is all there is to it. So now if I actually do an upgrade of my system, then Timeshift will actually automatically take a snapshot just prior to the upgrade. So an absolutely brilliant time saver, just in case anything goes wrong. You can easily go back to the system snapshot just prior to the upgrade. So very, very cool. And oftentimes I'll actually manually create snapshots every now and then just to make sure that I have a good running system. Cool, and that is it. So I'll close out of Timeshift and also out of Firefox. And there we go, we are done. So thank you for tuning into this session, and hopefully this will help you with your MX Linux system. It's a brilliant operating system, as I'm sure you probably have discovered already. So in the next episode, I'll actually show you how you can easily theme the system, and also we'll download and install some awesome applications for business and student use. So I'll catch you in the next episode. If you have any questions or anything like that, then just drop a comment in the comments. Give us a like if you like this video, and I'll catch you in the next episode.